I still remember the way the room went quiet when he said my name. Not the respectful kind of quiet, but the kind that feels like a trap snapping shut. We were all standing around the conference table, coffee cups half full, laptops open, pretending this was just another Monday meeting. Then my boss leaned back in his chair, smiled like he was enjoying himself, and decided to make me the example. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't swear. That was almost worse. He spoke slowly, clearly, like a teacher correcting a stupid child, listing everything I'd supposedly done wrong. Numbers he twisted. Emails he took out of context. Deadlines he'd changed without telling me. Every sentence landed heavier than the last, and with each one I felt my face burn hotter. People stared at the table. A few glanced at me with that look that says I'm glad it's not me. No one interrupted. No one defended me. And that's when I realized this wasn't feedback. It was humiliation, carefully packaged as leadership. What my boss didn't know was that this wasn't the first time he'd done this to me. It had been months of small cuts leading up to that moment. Sarcastic comments in front of clients. Jokes about my learning curve during team lunches. Private meetings where he'd praise my work, then turn around and criticize the same work publicly an hour later. Each time I told myself to be professional, to let it go, to not be difficult. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like an employee and started feeling like a target. So quietly, without any dramatic decision, I started documenting everything. I saved emails. I took notes after meetings. And one morning, after a particularly nasty comment he made in the hallway, I hit record on my phone before walking into the next meeting. As he kept talking that day, my mind split in two. One part of me was standing there, nodding, swallowing the lump in my throat, trying not to cry in front of people I saw every day. The other part was weirdly calm. It noticed the way he contradicted himself. It noticed how his tone shifted when someone more senior walked past the glass walls. It noticed how he looked at the door, making sure the right people were watching. That calm part of me kept thinking, just let him talk. Let him show exactly who he is. When he finally stopped, he asked if I had anything to say. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I said no. He smirked like he'd won something. The meeting moved on, but I barely heard another word. Afterward, I locked myself in a bathroom stall and shook. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I wanted to quit on the spot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I pulled out my phone and checked the recording. The audio was clear. Every word, every pause. His voice, confident and cruel, filling my headphones. Listening to it felt surreal, like hearing a stranger talk about my life. For the first time since I started working there, I felt something other than fear. I felt control. Not power yet, but the possibility of it. Evidence does that. It changes the math. I didn't do anything right away. That's the part people do like when they hear this story. They want instant revenge, a dramatic confrontation, a viral moment. Real life doesn't work that way. I kept my head down. I did my job. I smiled in the hallway. And every time he crossed a line, I recorded, documented, backed it up in 3 different places. Weeks passed, then months. The pattern became impossible to ignore. He didn't humiliate everyone, just certain people. The quieter ones, the ones without connections, the ones he thought wouldn't fight back. And all the while, he kept telling us how lucky we were to have such a transparent manager. The breaking point came during a company-wide meeting. Bigger room, bigger audience. He decided to tell a story about a recent project failure and used my name like a punchline. Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous and thin. My chest tightened, but my phone was already recording. He went further this time, exaggerating mistakes, assigning blame that wasn't mine, enjoying the attention. When it was over, people avoided my eyes as they filed out. He gave me a satisfied nod, like this was supposed to motivate me. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I listened to everything I'd collected. Hours of audio, dates, times, witnesses. I realized something then that changed everything. This wasn't about me being sensitive or bad at my job. This was about him needing an audience, and me finally having proof. The next morning, I woke up with that familiar weight in my chest, the one that makes you consider calling in sick just to delay facing the day. But something was different. I wasn't replaying his words in my head anymore. I already had them, recorded, fixed in time. That knowledge changed how I walked into the office. I wasn't braver exactly. I was steadier. When he passed my desk and made a comment about thicker skin, I smiled and kept typing, my phone quietly recording in my pocket. I started noticing how often he performed like this, how he waited for moments when people were gathered, how he softened his tone in one-on-one conversations just enough to stay plausible. It wasn't random. It was strategy. I also started noticing the cost. People flinched when he spoke. Meetings ran longer because no one wanted to volunteer ideas. Good employees stopped pushing back and started disengaging. And every time he humiliated someone, the rest of us learned a lesson about silence. I wasn't just documenting my own treatment anymore. I was documenting a culture. That realization scared me more than the humiliation ever had. Because if I stayed quiet, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was helping him keep doing it. I thought about going to HR. Everyone does. But anyone who's been through this knows how complicated that feels. HR wasn't some neutral third party floating above the company. They sat 10 desks down from him. They laughed at his jokes. They used the same words he did. Still, I made an appointment. I rehearsed what I'd say all night, keeping it calm, professional, factual. I didn't bring the recordings yet. I talked about feeling undermined, about public criticism, about inconsistency. The HR rep nodded sympathetically and took notes. She asked if I'd tried talking to him directly. She suggested communication training. She thanked me for being brave enough to share. When I left her office, I knew exactly how that conversation would be summarized. As a misunderstanding, as feedback both ways, as nothing that required action. That's when I stopped hoping for protection and started planning for consequences. I consulted an employment lawyer during my lunch break, sitting in my car with the windows cracked. I didn't dramatize anything. I just played him a few clips. The lawyer went very quiet. Then he asked how long this had been happening. He asked if I had witnesses. He asked if I'd ever been warned or written up. When I told him no, he leaned back and said, "Keep doing what you're doing. Don't confront him. Don't let on that you're recording. Let him build the case for you." Hearing that felt surreal. Like I'd stepped into a version of reality where this wasn't just happening to me, it was being taken seriously. Weeks later, my boss crossed a line even he couldn't spin. During a meeting with senior leadership, he mocked my competence directly, using a slur he probably thought was mild enough to pass. The room froze. A few people shifted uncomfortably. No one laughed. I kept my face neutral, my phone recording, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might be audible. After the meeting, one of the directors pulled me aside and quietly said, "That was inappropriate." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't action, but it was confirmation. I wasn't imagining this. That night I organized everything. Files labeled by date, transcripts, notes. I sent a single email to HR, attaching a folder and requesting a formal investigation. I copied my lawyer. I went to bed and slept deeper than I had in months. The next day, my boss didn't come to work. The day after that, HR asked me to work remotely for a while. The office buzzed with rumors. People suddenly wanted to talk, to share their own stories, to ask if I was okay. When HR finally called me in, it wasn't for a mediation session. It was to tell me he was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty and relieved and sad all at once. He never apologized to me. He sent a short email saying he was surprised and disappointed and hoped we could move forward constructively. Weeks later, he was gone. Quietly, no announcement, no explanation, just erased from the org chart like he'd never been there. The company offered me a new role under a different manager. A fresh start. People called me brave, strong. What they didn't see was the months of swallowing fear, the nights replaying meetings, the careful patience it took to let the truth surface on its own. Recording him didn't make me powerful. It made me prepared. And that made all the difference. After he was gone, the office felt different in ways that were subtle at first. Meetings got quieter, then slowly more open. People started disagreeing again, carefully, like they were testing whether it was safe. The new manager asked questions instead of making speeches. No one laughed at the wrong moments anymore. And still, every time my phone buzzed during a meeting, my body tensed, half expecting his voice to come back through it. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the source leaves. It lingers in habits, in reflexes, in the way you choose your words. I was asked more than once if I'd do it again, if I'd record, if I'd stay so quiet for so long. The honest answer is complicated. Part of me wishes I'd spoken up earlier, drawn a line before things got so bad. Another part of me knows I wasn't ready then. I didn't have proof. I didn't have support. And I didn't yet understand how systems protect people like him until they're forced not to. Silence wasn't weakness in that moment. It was survival. Documentation was strategy. What surprised me most was how many people came forward afterward. Colleagues I barely knew stopped me in the hallway to say they'd experienced the same thing. Former employees reached out on LinkedIn with stories eerily similar to mine. Different dates, different rooms, same patterns. Public humiliation disguised as high standards. Private charm paired with public cruelty. Each message reinforced something important. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a cycle, and cycles only break when someone interrupts them with facts that can't be argued away. I also learned something uncomfortable about power. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, uses corporate language, and frames harm as humor or motivation. It relies on people being too busy, too scared, or too exhausted to challenge it. Recording wasn't about revenge. It was about accuracy, about making sure my memory wasn't gaslit into doubt. When someone knows their words might one day be heard exactly as they said them, stripped of spin, that's when accountability becomes real. There were consequences for me too. I won't pretend it was all clean and heroic. I became more cautious at work, more selective about trust. I double-checked policies. I learned the laws around consent and recording. I paid legal fees. I carried stress in my shoulders for months, but I also gained something I didn't expect. Confidence rooted in reality, not approval. I knew what had happened. I knew I hadn't imagined it. And no one could take that away. Sometimes I think about that first meeting, the one where he tried to break me in front of everyone. I remember how small I felt standing there, how alone. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I wouldn't tell them to be braver or louder. I'd tell them to pay attention, to trust their instincts, to understand that humiliation thrives in ambiguity, and the simplest way to fight it is to remove doubt. Clarity is dangerous to bullies. I didn't become a hero. I didn't expose him online or ruin his life. I let his own words do what they were always going to do once they were heard without his control. That's the part people miss. He defeated himself. I just pressed record and waited. And waiting, when done deliberately, can be the most powerful move of all. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that you don't need to win every battle in the moment. Some battles are won by staying steady long enough for the truth to catch up, by choosing evidence over emotion, patience over impulse. Not everyone can do that, and not everyone should. But when you can, when the situation allows it, it changes the outcome entirely. My boss humiliated me publicly, thinking I'd carry that shame quietly and move on or burn out. He never imagined that every word he used to make himself feel bigger was being preserved. He thought power lived in the room, in the audience, in the moment. He was wrong. Power lived in the record, and once that record existed, the ending was inevitable.